Wyoming Territory. Early spring of 1879, the wind carried the scent of thawing earth and pine, and Weston Farley was chasing a runaway boot. It tumbled across the muddy yard like a kicked can, carried by the wind that never seemed to quit around these parts. He caught it just before it rolled into the horse trough, cursing under his breath as he straightened up and wiped his wet hands on his trousers. A baby's cry rose from the cabin behind him, sharp and tired. The others were already awake too. He could hear the muffled sounds of arguing over a wooden spoon and someone stomping their boots hard enough to shake the porch. "Daddy," came the shout from inside. Daisy spilled the flour again. Weston sighed, shoved his foot in the boot, and made his way back through the front door of the small, worn cabin perched on the edge of the forest, just east of the Big Horn Mountains. The place was loud, crowded, and smelled like pine smoke and biscuits. His 4 children, Daisy, Daniel, Delia, and Dorian, all under the age of 10, were half-dressed and already bickering over breakfast. "Enough," Weston said, firm but not angry. "Get your shoes on. We got fence to mend before the rain hits." He kissed the top of Daisy's head as he moved past her, grabbing his rifle and hat. His wife had been gone for over 2 winters now, a sudden fever that hit fast and took faster. Since then, it had just been him and the children, trying to keep the land and each other from falling apart. He never expected to find anyone else again. He surely never expected to find her. It was late that afternoon when he spotted the figure. Weston had ridden out past the edge of his grazing field, looking for the calf that had gone missing the day before. The air smelled like snow, and the clouds were gathering heavy. He had just crested a rise when he saw her, curled beneath a half-fallen pine, her dress torn and her arms wrapped tight around her knees. She looked up when his horse snorted. Her eyes were wide, full of fear, and she did not speak. "Miss," Weston dismounted, slow and careful. "You all right?" She flinched as he stepped closer. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her hands were trembling, not from cold, but something deeper. Her skin was scraped, dirt smudged her cheeks, and her boots were missing. He stopped a few feet away and crouched. "You hurt?" She shook her head barely. "What's your name?" "Glenna," she whispered, voice hoarse. "Glenna," he repeated softly. "You out here alone?" A pause, then a nod. Barely. He did not press her, not yet. He pulled his coat off and offered it. She hesitated, then reached for it, wrapping it around her shoulders. When her fingers brushed his, they were ice cold. "I got a cabin not far," he said. "You can rest there. My kids are there. It'll be warm. Safe." She looked at him then, really looked. Her eyes searched his face like she was trying to decide if he meant it, if she could trust him. He let her take her time. Finally, she gave a small nod. He lifted her gently into the saddle, then mounted behind her, keeping his arm steady around her waist to hold her upright. She leaned back against him, exhausted, and he felt the weight of her fear settle into silence between them. Back at the cabin, the children went still when he carried her through the door. Daisy ran to the side of the bed as Weston laid Glenna down. "Is she dead?" Daniel asked, wide-eyed. "No," Weston said. "She is just tired." They watched as Glenna fell asleep without a word. Weston tucked a blanket over her and sat down in the corner, rifle across his lap. He stayed awake all night, listening to her breathe. By morning, she was still there. And over the next few days, she stayed. Glenna did not talk much at first, but she helped. She swept the floor, taught Dorian how to mend a torn shirt, and offered a soft touch when Delia scraped her knee. She had a quiet strength about her, a patience that filled the empty corners of the house. The children took to her fast, especially Daisy, who followed her like a shadow. Weston noticed the way Glenna smiled when she thought no one was watching, how her eyes softened when Delia handed her wildflowers, how she started humming while she cooked. She had not told him where she came from. He did not ask, not yet, not when the bruises on her arms were still fading. One night after the children were asleep, Weston stepped onto the porch and found Glenna sitting on the steps, staring at the sky. "I used to count stars," she said quietly. "Before." He sat beside her. "Before what?" She looked down at her hands. "Before everything broke. The air was still. The moonlight lit half her face." I was staying with an uncle, she said. After my mother died, he said he would take care of me, but she swallowed. He didn't. Weston's jaw clenched. He did not speak. I ran, Glenna whispered. I ran for days. I do not remember much, only that I was cold. I thought maybe I would die out there. You would have, Weston said, voice low. If I had not found you. She looked at him, really looked. Why did you help me? He met her gaze. Because someone needed to. They sat in silence for a long time, the stars above them bright and quiet. Then Glenna leaned her head against his shoulder. I feel safe here, she said. He rested his hand over hers. Then stay. And she did. She stayed through spring and into the slow bloom of summer. She mended clothes, kissed scraped foreheads, and taught Daisy how to read. The children started calling her Miss Glenna, but Weston noticed how often Dorian slipped and called her Ma. Weston watched her the way she held them, laughed with them, cried once under the kitchen table when she thought no one saw. But he had seen. And he had knelt beside her, held her hand, and said nothing. Just stayed with her until the tears stopped. Then one night, as thunder rolled over the hills and lightning cracked across the sky, Glenna ran to him in the dark, breathless and shaking. She threw herself into his arms and held on like the storm would carry her away if she let go. I had a dream, she whispered against his chest. He found me. He won't, Weston said, his arms tightening around her. Not while I live. She looked up at him and something in her eyes changed. She was not trembling anymore. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers soft against his cheek. I think you saved me, she said. He leaned in slow. No, he said, you saved us. And then he kissed her. The wheat-colored mare was limping by the time Weston led her back from the southern field. A split hoof, likely from a hidden stone in the grass. He rubbed her shoulder while she drank slow from the trough, her flanks heaving with the last light of the day slanting across her back. Glenna stood a few feet off, watching as Daniel and Dorian dragged fence wire toward the lean-to, their hands dark with rust. The mare's hurt, Weston said without turning. I saw. Glenna stepped closer, a wet cloth in hand. Let me clean her off. She knelt beside the horse, gentle and unhurried. Weston noticed how steady her hands were even when the animal flinched. She murmured something low under her breath, not words exactly, just sound, soft and steady. The mare calmed. You've done this before, he said. I worked with a doctor in Kansas, she replied, wringing out the cloth. He was old and half blind by then. I did most of the stitching. Weston nodded. You ever stitch a man? Twice. She stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. One had a bullet in his leg. The other had tried to take what wasn't his. He studied her face, the calm in it. What happened to the second one? He walked with a limp after, she said, voice even. Delia called from the porch with a tin cup in her hand, waving it to catch Glenna's eye. Glenna went to her, tucking a stray hair behind Delia's ear before taking the cup and disappearing into the cabin. Weston stayed with the horse a while longer, his hand resting on her damp neck. It wasn't the injury that kept his mind turning, it was what Glenna hadn't said. And the way she looked at the world now, like she didn't quite trust it to stay still. That night, lightning flashed again, but no storm followed. The air hung heavy, close. Glenna sat at the table sewing a patch on Daniel's work shirt, and Weston carved a new handle for the axe. The children slept early, worn out from the day's chores. Do you ever think about leaving? Glenna asked, not looking up. He paused, knife mid-shave. Leaving where? Here, this place, starting over somewhere else. He set the blade down. I already started over. Right here, her fingers stilled on the fabric. I meant if it got hard. It's already hard, he said. But no, I won't run from it. She glanced at him then, her mouth soft with something almost like relief. I used to think staying in one place meant getting stuck. And now, I think it means growing roots. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was warm, full of things neither of them needed to explain. Later, Weston found her outside, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. The wind had changed, it smelled of rain and something else, something green and alive. Glenna stood barefoot in the dirt, her head tilted back. You feel it, she said. He stepped beside her. Feel what? Everything waking up again. They didn't speak after that. They watched the clouds move in slow across the hills, the stars blinking behind them. When Glenna reached for his hand, Weston didn't hesitate. The next morning brought news. A rider came from town, a man Weston knew only in passing. He stepped down from a dusted gelding and handed Weston a folded paper, his mouth tight. "Sheriff sent this, said to be watchful," he said. "Somebody bad slipped out of Cheyenne lockup 5 days ago. Man's dangerous. They think he's headed this way." The rider didn't stay long. After he left, Weston unfolded the notice. The drawing was crude but clear enough. A man's face, sharp-eyed and gaunt, with a thin scar across his jaw. Glenna froze when she saw it. "You know him," Weston said. Not a question. She nodded slowly, her arms wrapping around her middle. "His name's Elias, my uncle." Weston folded the paper again, slow. "He the one you ran from?" She nodded once more. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You think he'll come here?" "I don't know. He always said I belonged to him. He might try." Weston stepped closer. "Then he'll learn otherwise." Glenna's eyes lifted to his, and something old flickered there. Fear, yes, but behind it, belief. Not just in him, but in the life they were building. In the strength of it. That evening, Weston took the children aside. They listened close as he showed Daniel how to latch the back window and told Daisy where to hide if she heard shouting. Glenna stood nearby, her face unreadable, her hand resting on Delia's shoulder. "Will he come tonight?" Dorian asked. "No," Weston said. "But if he does, he won't get far." After the children were asleep, Glenna sat by the fire, her legs tucked under her. Weston poured her a tin of warm cider and handed it over. "He taught me how to trap birds," she said suddenly. "My uncle when I was little." Weston sat beside her, waiting. "He said it was about patience. You had to make the trap feel like part of the world, so the bird believed it." She sipped the cider, her hands steady. "But you can only trap something that doesn't know it's free," she added. "I didn't know back then. You do now," she nodded. "Because of you." He reached out then, his hand resting over hers, not claiming, just steady, present. "I want to stay," she said, "even if he comes, even if it's hard." He didn't speak. He just leaned forward and kissed her again, slower this time, like they had all the time in the world. Because now they did. The hills were pale with morning when Glenna rose from the cot in the back room and found Weston already outside, sleeves rolled, splitting wood. His axe met the log with clean rhythm, each stroke measured. She watched from the doorway a moment, arms folded against the chill, the smell of last night's rain still in the dirt. She crossed the yard in her bare feet, her skirt brushing wet grass. Weston looked up only when she was near. "I thought you'd sleep longer," he said. "I don't sleep deep anymore." She tugged her shawl tighter. "Not since I heard his name again." He nodded once and set the axe aside. "I've been thinking on something." She waited. "I want to marry you." Her breath caught sharp in her chest. He didn't look away, didn't fill the silence with reasons or promises, just stood there, steady as the land underfoot. "I don't want you to feel you owe me anything," she said at last. "I don't," he replied. "I want what we've already been building. Just with your name beside mine." Glenna looked toward the cabin where smoke curled soft from the chimney. "And the children, they already love you," he said. "And I think you love them back." She nodded. "I do." They stood there as the light slanted warmer across the field. A hawk called from the ridge. Glenna reached for his hand. "Then yes," she said, "if you'll wait until the danger's past." "I'll wait as long as it takes," Weston said. "But I'll start carving the ring today." By noon, the wind shifted west. Daniel came running from the ridge trail, breath short, cheeks flushed. "There's a rider," he said, "coming slow like he's studying the land." Weston sent Daniel to the barn and told Glenna to take the others inside. He saddled his gelding without hurry, his rifle slung across his back. He met the rider just past the tree line. The man wore a dark coat and rode a paint horse with a limp. His face was lean, eyes sharp with something bitter behind them. The scar on his jaw matched the drawing. "You Farley?" the man asked. Weston nodded. "I'm looking for a girl." "She's mine." No one here's yours, Weston said, the man's mouth twisted. She ain't yours either. You think she picked you. She just needed a roof. Weston didn't reply. He let the quiet stretch long. I'll come back tonight, the man said, and if she ain't waiting, I'll take her. One way or another. He turned his horse and rode off. Weston didn't follow. He rode back slow, thinking. When he reached the cabin, Glenna was waiting by the fence, her face unreadable. It was him, she said. Weston nodded. What did he say? That he's coming tonight. Glenna closed her eyes a moment. I'm not afraid of him anymore, but I don't want the children to see what's coming. They won't. I'll take them to the mill house. They can stay with the Carlins for the night. Glenna touched his sleeve. And me, you'll stay here, with me? That evening he lit no lamps. He showed Glenna where to stand if he called, where to wait if he didn't. The cabin was quiet. Outside, the grass whispered with wind. When the man came, he didn't knock. He stepped onto the porch like he owned it. You really think you can stop me? He said. She's not going with you, Weston replied. The man pulled a knife. Then you'll bleed for her. Weston didn't draw. He waited, still as stone. When the man lunged, Weston stepped aside, catching his wrist and slamming him against the frame of the door. The knife clattered to the floor. You're not taking anything from this place, Weston said. The man struggled, wild-eyed. Glenna stepped forward then, holding the rifle Weston had left by the hearth. Enough, she said. The man stilled. I'm not yours, she said. You never owned me, and if you take one more step, I'll prove it. The man looked between them. Then he stumbled back into the dark, vanishing into the trees. They didn't speak for a long time. When Weston turned, Glenna was still holding the rifle tight against her chest. I didn't think I could do it, she said. You didn't have to, Weston replied. But you did. She lowered the rifle, her hands finally shaking. Weston took it from her gently and set it aside, then he pulled her into his arms. I want to marry you tomorrow, she said into his shoulder. Not after now, he kissed her hair. Then tomorrow it'll be. They stood there as the sky lightened with the first edge of dawn, the long night finally behind them. The preacher arrived just after sunrise, his coat dusted with trail grit and his Bible wrapped in oilcloth to keep it clean. He tied his mule to the post by the porch and tipped his hat to Glenna, who stood waiting in her blue calico, hands folded neatly at her waist. Morning, miss, the preacher said, voice gravel low. You ready? She nodded once. Yes, sir. Inside, the children had been scrubbed and brushed within an inch of their patience. Delia held a bunch of late spring lupine gathered from the field behind the barn, and Daisy had braided a ribbon into her hair, though it hung crooked by the time Glenna noticed. Daniel stood straighter than usual, his shirt tucked proper under the suspenders, and Dorian clutched Weston's hand like he wasn't quite sure how the day would go. Weston wore his cleanest shirt, the one he only ever used for town errands or burying neighbors. He'd shaved that morning, though he left the edge of his beard. Glenna had never asked him to change a thing, and he hadn't thought to start now. They stood in the center of the cabin, the hearth cold for once, sunlight streaming through the eastern window. The preacher opened his book without ceremony. Marriage, he began, ain't a grand thing. It don't come with music or ease. It comes with dirt and work and days that stretch out long. But if two souls are honest and choose to be kind, it can hold more than any church wall. Glenna didn't cry. She met Weston's eyes with a steadiness that rooted him deeper than he'd ever stood. When the preacher asked for her promise, she gave it without hesitation. I do, she said, her voice clear. When Weston answered in turn, his hand around hers, he felt something shift inside him, not the falling in kind of love, but the settling in. The quiet thing that grows when you stop waiting for the world to take something away. They kissed and the children clapped, and outside the wind changed direction. Later, while the preacher rode off toward the pass, Glenna sat beside Weston on the cabin steps. Her boots, borrowed from a neighbor woman and a size too tight, lay in the grass beside her. Weston poured her a mug of warm chicory and passed it to her without speaking. I used to think I'd never belong to anything again, she said after a while. Not a family, not a place. Weston didn't look at her. He watched the children digging beside the well, their laughter rising like birdsong. "Does it feel different now?" he asked. She took a sip from the mug, then rested it on her knee. "Yes, like something's been planted, not grown yet, but deep in," he nodded, leaning back on his palms. "We'll water it." She turned toward him. "I want to work the kitchen garden." "There's space behind the barn that gets good light," he smiled, but didn't tease. "We'll clear the stones tomorrow. I want to teach Daisy how to use a needle proper, and Delia's got the makings of a reader. She'll need books. I can write to my cousin in Missouri. She teaches at a girls' school, might send some." Weston reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the back of it. "You're already mending this place," her voice softened. "And you've already given me a life." That night, they ate bread Glenna had baked from scratch, and stew that simmered all afternoon with wild onion and dried venison. The children fell asleep early, curled like pups under their quilts, and Weston added a second log to the fire before drawing the curtain closed. In the quiet that followed, Glenna sat at the table with her fingers threading through loose yarn, half finishing a scarf she'd started for Dorian. Weston stepped behind her and rested his hands on her shoulders, his touch light but certain. "Tomorrow's just another day," he said. "I know," she replied, "but it's ours." She leaned back into him, her eyes closing. "That's all I ever wanted." Outside, the moon rose slow and full, casting silver across the fields. There were fences to mend and chores waiting at dawn, but for that moment, the world held still, and the long ache that had lived in both of them for too long finally quieted. They had come through the dark and found each other whole, and together they would make a life that stayed. The edge of summer came with heat that clung to the neck and bees thick among the clover. Glenna stood behind the barn, apron damp at the middle, her fingernails lined with soil. The garden rose had taken to her care, sweet peas clung to their poles, and the first cucumber vines curled like green lace across the dirt. She straightened, easing the ache in her lower back, and shaded her eyes toward the ridge. Weston and Daniel were working fence again, hammer strikes echoing faint as heartbeat. The other children were inside under Delia's watch, the windows cracked to let the breeze through. Glenna pulled off her gloves and stepped back into the cabin, the smell of boiled laundry still lingering in the air. She found Daisy sitting at the table, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth as she traced letters onto a slate. "Is this right?" Daisy asked, lifting it. Glenna leaned down, pointing with the tip of her finger. "You missed the tail on the G, try it again, slower this time." Daisy nodded, and Glenna brushed a hand over her head before moving to the basin. She scrubbed her hands clean, then hung the damp apron by the door. The sound of boots on the porch made her turn. Weston stepped in, his hat tucked under one arm. His shirt clung to his chest, streaked with sweat and dust. He looked at her like he always did now, like she was already home, not something he was still trying to figure out. He reached for a cup and filled it from the jug. "Fence held better than I thought it would. Daniel's got a good eye for weak boards. He learns fast," Glenna said. Weston leaned against the doorway, drinking slow. "You want to go into town tomorrow?" She turned toward him. "What for?" "Supplies, and maybe something else." She raised an eyebrow. He set the cup down. "We never had a wedding supper. I thought maybe we'd pick up a bolt of cloth, find something you like." "I've got dresses, not like one I'll buy you," she smiled, this time without hesitation. "Then yes, I'd like that." They left Delia and Daniel in charge the next morning, with Dorian trailing Daniel like a pup. Glenna rode double with Weston, her arms around his waist, the sun warm on her neck. The ride into town took most of the morning, the trail dry and rutted from carts. At the general store, Weston picked out flour, salt, and a new saw blade. Glenna wandered toward the back, pausing at a bolt of dusky rose calico. She touched it, thumb brushing the weave. "You like it?" Weston asked from behind. "I do." He paid without a word, wrapping the fabric in brown paper and placing it carefully in her hands. They ate lunch at a bench outside the blacksmith's, sharing a tin of cold beans and fresh cornbread wrapped in cloth. Glenna watched the townsfolk pass, faces she didn't know and a few she did. No one looked at her with suspicion anymore, A woman from the post office even nodded as she passed. "I never thought I'd feel easy in a place like this," Glenna said, turning toward Weston. "You're not just in it," he said. "You're part of it." They rode home slow, the horse picking its way over the trail. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had dipped low, the sky turning the color of ripe peach. The children rushed out to meet them, Delia already talking about how the kettle had boiled over once, but not twice. That night, Glenna unwrapped the calico and laid it across the bed. She ran her hands over it, imagining the way it would fall when sewn. Weston came in behind her, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "You'll wear it when we have folks over next," he said. "We don't have folks over," she said. "Then we'll start." She turned to face him, her hands still on the fabric. "Are you sure you want all this?" The noise, the mess, the worry, he cupped her cheek, his fingers calloused but warm. "I'm sure of you." She leaned into his hand, eyes closing. "I spent years thinking no one would ever be. You were just waiting for the right someone to prove you wrong." They climbed into bed together, the windows open to the night sounds crickets, wind through the cottonwoods, the faint creak of the barn settling. Glenna curled against him, his arm around her waist, her breath slowing. In the weeks that followed, the fields greened with late crops, and the children grew leaner with work and sun. Glenna stitched her dress while Daisy learned to read whole pages aloud. Weston built a second chicken coop, and Daniel took up carving, his fingers quick and careful. One afternoon, Weston came in with a letter from Missouri. A box of books would follow, sent from Glenna's cousin. They read aloud together each evening, Glenna's voice weaving through the room like music. By the time the leaves began to turn, Dorian was able to saddle his own pony without help. Glenna's garden beds were thick with squash and late beans, and the pantry shelves filled slowly with jars she'd taught Delia to seal. They hosted neighbors in October, a long table set under the sky with roasted chicken, cornbread, apples, and pie. Glenna wore the rose calico, her hair braided back, and Weston held her hand beneath the table while Daniel passed cider around. After the others rode off, Glenna and Weston stood alone in the yard under a wash of stars. "You built all this," she said. "We built it," he corrected. "Together. I don't have to keep looking over my shoulder anymore." "No," he said. "You've arrived." She pulled him close, her hands at the back of his neck, and kissed him slow, the kind of kiss that didn't need words. The kind that said everything they'd already lived in the years that followed. They didn't live quietly, but they lived fully. Glenna taught children from nearby farms how to read. Weston raised horses with Daniel, and Delia began writing little stories of her own. Dorian grew tall and gentle, and Daisy learned to sew better than Glenna by the time she was 15. The land held them. The house aged with them. There were storms and dry years and births and burials. But through it all, Glenna and Weston stood side by side, never needing to speak what they both knew to be true. They had made a life from broken things. And it held.